Hi, my name is Jason. I'm the product lead here at Elevated Signals. Thank you for taking the time to join me today as I walk through how our software can help you compile your monthly CTS reports. So I'm going to dive straight into the software here. I'm going to start in our product catalog screen. So we've got fresh, dried, and a packaged 3.5 gram product. And I want to point out on the side here that the inventory categories that I have them set up for are corresponding to the CTS reporting categories that they should fit under. And then I've got two different work orders to go through. I've got a drying work order. So in this one, we've got 1,000 grams of fresh cannabis getting dried out to 350 grams of dried cannabis with 100 grams of destruction here. And then in a packaging work order, we're consuming 350 grams of that dried cannabis we just got out from our drying work order to create 96 quantity of packaged 3.5 gram bags, all with 12.2 grams of destruction. So one thing I wanted to point out with this work order specifically is this 96 quantity of packaged 3.5 gram bag, because on the left here, you can see that the output actually understands that it's 336 grams. And when you look at the processing loss, it also takes that into account to show you, what the calculated processing loss here is. And that's because if I go back to the product catalog and I go to package 3.5 gram bag, you can see I've actually got an equivalent unit set up here against this product so that the system understands that one quantity of this product is equal to 3.5 grams. So with that and the inventory categories and these two work orders set up, we can go ahead and pull our comprehensive inventory report, which is on our reports page. And at the bottom of the reports page, we have this experimental section where we have our comprehensive inventory report, as well as our comprehensive plants report. Now, I'm not going to go through a plant example today, but it has a lot of the information, or all of the information, I should say, from all of our cultivation reports in just one report. And so it's kind of going to accomplish the same thing for plants as what we're going to go through today in the inventory report. So when I hit download on the comprehensive inventory report, I would be able to set the start and the end date for the report that I'm pulling. So I'd want to set this to whatever reporting category I'm putting this together, reporting period I'm putting this together for. So if I'm pulling together August 2024, then I would go here and select August 1st as my starting date, and I would select August 31st as my ending date for this report. And what this would do is, because this report would contain all of the information I need to pull together my CTS, it's going to give me all of the inventory in my system that I have at the beginning of this report. So August 1st, how much inventory I have, and then how much inventory I have when I close this period on August 31st. I've also got these extra unit selections here where I can select either gram or quantity. And essentially what these will do is at the end of this report, there's a couple extra columns to have these units kind of live in and say, for each line in this report, if that inventory can be represented in this unit through an equivalent unit, then put the value of that into here. And that's just so that we can have a consistent column for grams to live in, a consistent column for quantity to live in. And you'll see what I mean when we pull this report, which I've already done, into a spreadsheet on the side here. So the comprehensive inventory report is quite a large report in terms of number of columns. It just has a lot of information in it, as well as a lot of troubleshooting information to go through, just everything that you could possibly need to find whatever you need to find within this report. In reality, there's only a few that you actually need to interact with to pull together your CTS report. One of them being the measure event type column right at the beginning. So this is the column that contextualizes what each line in this report is representing. So this line represents an opening inventory item. This line represents a closing inventory item. And these lines here are all the different components within the work orders that are happening in this period. The inventory product name here is obviously just the name of the product for each of these inventories, and then the inventory category is what category these products belong to. Going a lot farther along, we've got our work order type column, which tells us for these work order related items here, what work order type did it belong to, drying, packaging. And then finally, at the end, we have those custom units that I were talking about. So these are our packaged units, right, where it can be represented in both grams and quantity. And so by designating those here, when we were pulling the report, we get both sets of information, which you'll see is very useful when we're doing our next step. So I'm going to start to pull a CTS example together. And to do so, I just kind of hid all of those columns in the comprehensive report, just so that we don't really have to look at them because they might get a little bit in the way. So yeah, we'll walk through this. I've got a very, very simplified CTS inventory workbook set of a table down here. And I've got my unpackaged fresh cannabis column, unpackaged dried cannabis column, and my packaged dried cannabis column. So I'm going to be doing the package column as quantities, and then the other two as grams. So the first thing I like to do when I start pulling together a report is to just do my opening and my closing inventories. So I would just put a filter on my data set. I would filter for just opening inventory, and I've only got one line because of how small that my data set is. But if there were multiple lines, which I'm sure there would be, because this would give me all inventory that exists at the beginning of this reporting period, so at the beginning of August. In that case, I would have to do this, then filter inventory categories for whichever category I'm trying to find my opening inventory for. In this case, it's unpackaged fresh cannabis, so then I would press OK. And then I would just sum on my grams column here to figure out how much fresh cannabis I have opening for this period. So I've got 1,000 here. And then I would repeat this process. So I would filter this for unpackaged dried and packaged dried, but I've only got the one inventory open line, so I know that these will be zeros. Then I would do the same thing for inventory close. So I'd filter inventory close and then filter through all the different categories that I want to know about. I've also got none for fresh closing, none for my unpackaged dried closing, but I know that I have some for my packaged closing. And because I'm doing this packaged column in quantities, I'll just grab this 96 and put that into here. So you'll notice I have this other line here for the closing inventory check. This is just like on the CTS workbook itself, but essentially this is just saying, hey, if you take your opening inventory number and you add all the things you produced and you reduce all the things that reduced from your reports, it better come out with the same number that your reports say that you have for your closing inventory number. So right now you can see that these are not the same number, and so we know that we've still got work to do. The next step that I wanted to cover here is the next simplest thing, which is destruction. So I would just filter my measure event types for my destruction types. So in this one, I only have work order destructions, but destructions that happen directly against inventory would also be here as a possible measure event type, and it would just be a destruction work order measure event type that you could also filter on. So I'd filter for all my destructions, and I would filter the category for whichever one I'm trying to fill out. I've only got the 2 here, so I'm not really going to bother doing that. So I'll just see, okay, for fresh, I've got 100, and for dried, I got 12.2. So I'll put 100, and I'll put 12.2. So once you've got your opening and your closing inventories down, if you had shipping and receiving here, this is also when I would do that. But once you have all of that down, then I would move on to work order types. So I would get all my information back and throw a fresh filter onto this, and then I would filter by work order type. So I would go through each work order type and basically pull all the information I need out of it to add to my CTS report. And once I go through all of that, I should effectively be done. So when I look at a work order drying work order, I know that I output dried cannabis, and I know that that needs to go into my quantity produced under my unpackaged dried cannabis column. So put 350 here. If you have a lot of information to filter through here, the best option here would be filtering for work order output measure event, and then filtering for drying, and then you would just sum on that column. I know that anything I put into quantity produced under unpackaged dried cannabis is actually also going to be added to my quantity processed for unpackaged fresh cannabis, so I'll go ahead and add that. And then the only thing I need to do after that is just take into account processing loss. Now, because in this report, inputs are negative lines, we can actually just sum this column. And so regardless of how many different work orders are in this, you could just sum this column and that would give you your total processing loss for your entire month from dryings. So, or I guess for drying, it'd be drying loss. So the sum of this in the bottom right corner here, just under my face, says sum negative 550. And so it's not actually, it's not negative 550 processing loss, it's 550 processing loss. So it would just be whatever the sum of this by negative. And that's it. Our closing inventory check for fresh cannabis is now 0. Our closing inventory is 0. So we're done with this column. The only thing left to do is to continue forward and just do our other work order types. So we have packaging and we'd follow the same steps. So we know that we have our work order output of packaged dried cannabis here. And so we'd put our 96 output under quantity produced because we're doing this side in quantities. And then we'd want this corresponding production to be in my quantity processed. Oh, my apologies. Not quantity produced. This is, sorry, it is produced. Take your 336, not put it into processed, you want to put it into quantity packaged. So we have 336 grams in there. And then after that, we just do our processing loss, which is just going to be our sum on this gram side, which we can see is going to be 1.8. And so now we have basically completed our very simplified CTS example. And hopefully you're able to see, the power, you could be tracking, 0.5 gram like bulk pre-rolls or something like that. Something that you naturally want to track as a quantity, and it could still be unpackaged dried cannabis, but you want to understand its weight through equivalent units, and through this report, you can do everything you need to do to basically, record either side, whether it's something going to the packaged, whether it's an unpackaged, you need your processing loss in grams, but you need to be able to output in quantities, things like that can all be handled through this report if your instance is set up correctly. So what happens if things aren't really easy, they don't just all fit together and you have a problem? I've got an example for that too. So I've got the same setup as before, but I've snuck in a problematic line in here somewhere. And basically I've set this up where if you follow the same steps as I did before, so get my opening inventory numbers, get my closing inventory numbers, get my quantity destroyed numbers, and then do my work orders, I end up with a discrepancy where my closing inventory check is 100 for fresh and negative 100 for my dried, but the closing inventories should be 0. So what went wrong? It's a very convenient example, but when you see something like 100 and negative 100 in 2 columns, then my first hunch is to look for work orders that impact both columns, which is drying for fresh and dried cannabis. So I would just filter for drying, and then I would just go through this and just make sure that everything is correct. So I know that my output for dried cannabis is 350 grams. That's correct and put in. And then I know that my destruction should be against fresh cannabis, but it actually says it's under dried cannabis here. And so that's what happened when at the beginning, when we went through and summed my inventory categories and I summed by unpackaged dried cannabis destructions, this one popped up as well as the one for the packaging. And I summed that together for 112.2 when really this needs to be a fresh cannabis destruction. So I've expanded out these 2 extra columns here that tell me exactly which work order ID it's in. So I could just copy this 25079 and go to my software and just put that into the search bar in the top left and find my drying work order very quickly. And I could reopen this work order and redo this destruction event so that it's under the right category. Yeah. And then once that was done, you could repull the report, redo this thing, and just make sure that it comes out correctly, in which case, yeah, it should. Now this would be a fresh destruction. This should say 100. This would say 12.2. You're good to go, and everything is happy again. So that was obviously a simplified example of some things that can go wrong in the system, but that can go wrong while you're compiling the CTS. But that's why there's so many columns in the comprehensive report to kind of cover a lot of the things that we find can commonly cause issues when you're compiling your CTS. So I'm just going to run through the rest of these columns and just kind of explain how you might use them or to help you troubleshoot things that might go wrong while you're compiling your report. So we have these two columns, measure event performed on and measure event recorded on. So we have our measure event performed on, which is for if you're backdating something, this is the date that you're putting into the system. And then the measure event recorded on is the date that you are like doing the activity of is the date that you're like punching it into elevated signals. So if I were backdating something to last month, then this performed on would say, July. And then this measure event recorded on would say August or September. And how this might help is if you pull your report this month and your opening inventory doesn't quite match your closing inventory from the previous month, you could pull this comprehensive report again for the previous month and look for measure events that happened within the month, but they were recorded after maybe you compiled this report last month. And you can go and make the necessary changes, or you can reconcile things differently, but at least you'll be able to find what is kind of like the difference between your two sets of inventory. After that, we have our batch information here. So which batch they're a part of, which lot they're a part of, the specific inventory IDs. So if you really wanted to, if you had some Excel Kung Fu, you could maybe set up a pivot table or something like that and really track what happens to every single batch, or maybe lot, or maybe inventory, or at the product level. We have all of our work order info after that. So we went through that briefly and how you might be able to find issues there. And then we have our work order opening and closing dates. And then we have our shipping order information and purchase order information would go here. Then all of our destruction information goes here. And then finally, whoever took that action would go into this user email section here. So you can see I was the one who did all of these actions. Finally, we have our measure event and display unit. So this is just going to be whatever this action was and whatever unit it was taken in. And then the same thing again, except for whatever display unit is set up for that product. And then finally, at the end, any consistent units that you want to understand for this report that you designate when you pull the report down. So lots to go through in terms of trying to find what went wrong month to month in lots of different ways that you can pull this report and look for different things. And it doesn't always have to, end with just throwing filters on and throwing like 100 different filters on to put your CTS together. Because if you can just throw a pivot table onto the comprehensive report, you can get something that looks like this. And for this, I've got, one set of rows here. It's going to be your inventory category, and then the measure event type roll up for those, and then the gram roll up for each work order type. So, for example, if we look at this unpackaged fresh cannabis section, you can see that we open with 1,000 grams. And that in our drying work order, we have 100 grams of destruction from fresh cannabis, and we have 1,000 input from fresh cannabis. For unpackaged dried cannabis, we don't start or close with any inventory, but we output 350 from drying. We consume 350 into packaging, and we destroy 12.2 in that packaged side as well. So this is a lot of the information that I pulled out, all of the numbers that I put into this CTS example here, but just through a pivot table. So you don't have to keep throwing a bunch of filters on. You just get it in one big table, and you can just go ahead and add things together. Some closing thoughts on this before I dive into kind of the ending spiel here is that the comprehensive report also comes with another set functionality that I didn't show off here, which is that it actually also brings in measure events that happen outside of the reporting period that you're pulling for. And that is for when you need to figure out work in progress material. So maybe you have some work orders that are open crossing reporting periods, something that started in July and crossed into August, and you want to accurately make sure that you're representing that as part of your opening inventory. So this report will also bring in for all work orders that are open at the beginning of the period. So any work orders that are open on August 1st in this case would also bring in all measure events, regardless of what month they happened in, into this report. So just something to be wary of if you're going to go pull this report, that not everything might be within the reporting period that you're pulling. It might have some things from before as well, and you would just check and make sure that your measure event performed on, you would just check the measure event performed on to just make sure that that's happening either within the period or outside of the period. Yeah, that is pretty much that. So, as a thank you for joining this webinar, we do have a special offer where if you sign up for 3 months for our CTS service, you can get 1 month free, which is a $500 value. And that CTS service would, we would basically help you set up your instance like I've shown off today, where we put all your products into CTS categories and get all your equivalent units set up. And we would help you complete your CTS report for you every month, along with providing some notes on any issues or finding that we've had for that month, kind of like, hey, maybe this destruction shouldn't be categorized this way. Here's some suggestions on how to improve that in the future. Just anything weird we find is, especially too, we'll also kind of raise the flag on if we find that a work order has like too much or too little processing loss. Yeah. So if you're interested in that service, reach out to your rep at Elevated Signals, or you can email us at success@elevatedsignals.com. And if you're new to ES, you can visit elevatedsignals.com if you want to learn more about how to get started using the software and take advantage of this offer as well. So thank you again for taking your time today to go through CTS with me, and let us know if you have any questions or any interest in taking advantage of our offer. Have a great day.